All right, so get this. Imagine a world where gold, it isn't actually gold. Like, what if that precious metal, the one we valued forever, could be like transformed into something else, entirely different? That's what we're diving into today. This collection of sources, snippets from all sorts of books, alchemy, goldsmithing, there's even some stuff about secret societies.
Yeah.
And they all seem to hint at this, like hidden technology, maybe alchemy related, that might have the power to actually change gold, like at its core. So we're on a quest, right? Is this gold transformation? Is it just a total myth? Or could there be some real science behind it? Alchemy gets a bad rap sometimes, a lot of mystical rituals, not a lot of hard science. Should we even be taking this seriously?
Yeah, I mean, you're right to be skeptical for sure. Alchemy dances between mysticism and practicality. On the one hand, you've got the side that's focused on spiritual transformation, but on the other hand, there's this whole thing about manipulating matter, and this is where it gets interesting. Some alchemists, way back when, were already kind of messing with concepts that sound super familiar to modern physics.
Hold up. Most of us barely scraped by in high school chemistry. What does, quantum anything have to do with alchemy?
It's pretty wild, right? Quantum coherence, for example. It's this idea that particles can be linked in a way that just defies the rules of classical physics. And then you've got stuff like super deformed nuclei, which are basically atomic nuclei that are stretched into weird shapes and have these unusual properties.
Okay, but how does a weird nucleus shape connect to changing what an element is? That's like the core of alchemy, right? Turning lead into gold, all that.
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question. It's fascinating, though, because some alchemists talked about harnessing the life force of matter. And now you've got some modern physicists exploring things like time being a physical force that can affect the properties of matter. There's this Russian physicist, Dr. Kozyrev, who did experiments with gyroscopes, spinning them at certain speeds, and he claimed that he could change their weight.
Wait, are we talking time travel here?
Let's not get ahead of ourselves. But Kozyrev's work definitely suggests that we don't totally understand time, and if time can influence matter, well, who knows what possibilities open up.
Okay, so I'm trying to picture this. If I squished an atom's nucleus into a weird shape, how does that, make it act like different stuff?
Think of it this way. Imagine you have a lump of clay. You can mold it into different shapes, right? But it's still clay. Now imagine you could somehow change the clay itself, not just its form. That's kind of what we're talking about with super deformed nuclei. They're like the same basic clay, but their internal structure, their energy levels are so different that they start to behave in ways we wouldn't expect.
So are you saying there's a chance that we could manipulate matter on such a fundamental level that we could actually transform gold into something else?
It's definitely a possibility, and there are some specific figures who seem to bridge that gap between alchemy and modern physics. One name that keeps popping up in these sources is Dr. Walther Gerlach, a pretty prominent German physicist. He even published an article back in 1924 about, get this, transmuting mercury into gold.
Whoa, a respected physicist writing about turning one element into another.
Yeah.
That sounds a lot like alchemy, even if they weren't calling it that back then.
Exactly. And Gerlach wasn't some, fringe scientist. He won the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1944. There are even whispers about him being involved with some shady wartime research projects.
Okay, now this is getting interesting. Nazis and secret experiments. This is what I live for. So where do we go from here? What else did you find in these sources that hints at how this gold transformation might actually work?
Well, remember those super deformed nuclei I mentioned? Apparently, they can undergo this unique kind of fission. They can spontaneously split without needing anything to trigger it, like neutron bombardment. And this seems to be linked to their unique properties, their strange spin, how they bond together in these weird quasi-molecular structures. They can even release intense bursts of gamma radiation.
Okay, I'm following so far. But how does this tie back to gold?
That's the big question. The answer might lie in the idea that if we can control these super deformed nuclei, we might be able to manipulate the building blocks of matter itself. And if you can do that, who knows what's possible? Maybe turning lead into gold is just the tip of the iceberg.
Wow, so we're really going down a rabbit hole here. But is there anything in the sources to suggest this is more than just, wild speculation?
That's where it gets even wilder. One of the sources talks about this idea of philosophical mercury. It's not regular mercury, but something alchemists saw as a fundamental building block of all matter. They believed if you could purify and manipulate this philosophical mercury, you could achieve transmutation.
Okay, so we're talking about changing the very essence of matter, not just rearranging atoms like in a chemical reaction.
Precisely. And the alchemists had this concept of the quintessence. the fifth element beyond earth, air, fire, and water. They saw it as a kind of life force or vital energy that permeates everything and could be harnessed for transmutation.
This is giving me some serious Full Metal Alchemist vibes. But hold on, before we go full UFO conspiracy, does any of this actually support or debunk the idea of changing gold itself?
That's where things get really interesting. We've talked about the physics side, but the alchemists had their own theory of matter. And that's where this philosophical mercury idea comes in. So we're talking about this philosophical mercury, this fundamental building block, according to the alchemists. And they had this process they would go through to try and achieve transmutation, separating and purifying this white salt from, are you ready for this? Urine.
Hold up, urine. Are we talking like philosopher's stone made from pee?
Sounds crazy, right? But that's what some of these texts suggest. Remember, we're dealing with alchemy here. Things aren't always as they appear. They believe that urine contained this vital essence, this philosophical mercury, but in kind of a crude form. And by carefully separating it, purifying it, and recombining this white salt, they thought they could create a substance capable of transmuting metals.
Okay, even for alchemy, that sounds pretty out there. Did any of the sources suggest a more plausible mechanism?
Well, it gets even more interesting. The alchemist described heating this white salt, and it would go through a series of color changes, like black to white to red, eventually becoming something they called the red stone, which they believed held the power of transmutation. And these color changes they documented, they actually sound kind of similar to the way super deformed nuclei de-excite, releasing energy and changing their properties.
All right, let me make sure I got this straight. We're taking ancient alchemy, potentially throwing in some pee, and somehow connecting it to nuclear physics and the fundamental nature of matter.
It's a wild ride, isn't it? But that's the beauty of these deep dives, confronting these seemingly outlandish ideas and asking, what if? What if there's more to reality than we currently understand? What if the alchemists, in their own way, were stumbling onto some profound truths about the universe?
I have to admit, this is starting to feel like we're onto something big here. This isn't just about transforming gold anymore. This is about challenging everything we thought we knew about the world around us.
Exactly. And if we follow this line of thinking, it raises some pretty profound questions. What if manipulating matter at this fundamental level is possible? What would that mean for our understanding of physics, chemistry, even biology? Could we create new materials with unheard of properties? Could we potentially even manipulate our own DNA in ways we never thought possible?
Wow, so we're going from mind-blowing to full-blown existential crisis territory. I'm not sure if I'm excited or terrified right now.
And remember, we still haven't touched on that red mercury stuff.
Oh yeah, what about that? Some sources described it as having applications in like advanced weaponry and even spacecraft propulsion.
Right. Some people believe it's incredibly powerful and could even be some kind of super fuel. And this ties back into those torsion fields we talked about earlier. Some physicists think torsion fields, generated by spinning objects, could be used to manipulate gravity itself.
Okay, hold on. Spacecraft propulsion. Are we saying this stuff could be like rocket fuel, but like 1,000 times more powerful?
That's what some believe. And here's where red mercury might come in. Some theorists think it could interact with torsion fields, amplifying their effects. Imagine it as a catalyst, enabling you to generate much stronger torsion fields with less energy.
So potentially we're talking about a substance that could not only propel spacecraft, but maybe even create those torsion gates we discussed. Portals to other dimensions or even time travel? This is wild.
It definitely pushes the boundaries of what we think is possible. And the fact that the sources mention the Nazis potentially experimenting with red mercury just adds another layer of intrigue, right? There are stories of them trying to develop advanced weapons based on this stuff, and even testing some kind of experimental flying craft using red mercury for propulsion.
Okay, now this is getting into Indiana Jones territory. Secret Nazi labs, hidden formulas for exotic matter, and the potential to rewrite the laws of physics. I can totally see why this topic has captured people's imaginations for decades. But before we go full conspiracy theory, what exactly is red mercury? What do the sources say about its properties?
Well, the sources are a bit fragmented on red mercury, but there are some intriguing nuggets to unearth. Some describe it as a dense reddish-purple liquid.
Okay, so we're not talking about your average thermometer mercury here. What else?
It's supposedly incredibly powerful, with potential applications ranging from advanced weaponry to get this even spacecraft propulsion.
Hold on, spacecraft propulsion. That's a new one. Are we saying this stuff could be some kind of like rocket fuel, but like 1,000 times more powerful than anything we have today?
That's what some people believe. And this kind of circles back to the idea of torsion fields we discussed earlier, those hypothetical fields generated by spinning objects. Some physicists think they could be used to manipulate gravity itself.
Right, like twisting the fabric of space-time, creating a warp drive or something. But how does red mercury fit into all of this?
Well, some theorists suggest that red mercury might have these unique properties that allow it to interact with these torsion fields, amplifying their effects. Think of it as a catalyst, enabling you to generate much stronger torsion fields with less energy.
So we're talking about a substance that could not only propel spacecraft, but maybe even create those torsion gates we discussed earlier. Those portals to other dimensions or even time travel.
It's a wild concept for sure, and the fact that the sources mention the Nazis potentially experimenting with red mercury just adds another layer of intrigue, right? There are stories about them trying to develop advanced weapons based on this stuff, even testing some experimental flying craft that used red mercury for propulsion.
This is straight out of an Indiana Jones movie. Secret Nazi labs,
Yeah.
hidden formulas for exotic matter, the potential to rewrite the laws of physics. I can totally see why this topic has captured people's imaginations for decades. But let's get back to the core question here. We started this deep dive wondering if gold could be transformed into something else. Does any of this red mercury business actually shed light on that?
That's where it gets really fascinating. Some sources hint that red mercury might be connected to that philosophical mercury the alchemists were obsessed with. They even suggest that it might be created through some kind of alchemical process.
Wait, so we're back to alchemy again. Are you suggesting that the Nazis, those supposed paragons of scientific rationality, might have been dabbling in ancient mystical practices to, change gold?
It's a possibility. Remember, the Nazis were heavily influenced by occult beliefs, and they weren't afraid to explore any avenue, no matter how unconventional, if they thought it might give them an advantage.
So we've got a potential link between ancient alchemy, cutting-edge physics, and secret Nazi experiments, all centered around this mysterious substance called red mercury. This is one deep dive I won't forget.
What's truly remarkable is how all these seemingly disparate threads, from ancient myths to modern scientific discoveries, seem to converge on the idea of manipulating matter at its most fundamental level. It's like there's a hidden code embedded in the fabric of reality, and we're only beginning to decipher it.
So what does this all mean for us, for our understanding of the world and our place in it? If we take these ideas seriously, it's like looking in a mirror and realizing the reflection staring back is far more complex and mysterious than we ever imagined.
Exactly. And that's the power of a deep dive like this. It's not just about uncovering facts, it's about expanding our horizons, questioning assumptions, and embracing the possibility that the universe is a far stranger and more wonderful place than we ever dreamed possible.
Wow, I think we've given our listeners plenty to ponder today.
Indeed. If there's one thing to take away from all this, it's that the pursuit of knowledge is a journey without end. There will always be mysteries to unravel, questions to ask, and new perspectives to explore.
Well said. To all our listeners out there, keep those minds open, keep exploring those rabbit holes, and who knows what incredible discoveries you might make. Until next time, keep diving deep.